Hey guys, so I just installed the latest version of Blender and I thought I'd quickly just go through what we covered today as well as some of the areas that we may have missed due to power cuts. So once you've entered the screen, you can just click anywhere on your viewport. So this over here is your viewport and you can change your viewport to many different options over here, which we'll go into as and when needed. I'd rather show you by doing than show you everything at once, because that's kind of pointless. Now Blender works best with a full keyboard. A full keyboard is any keyboard that has numpads. You can use a smaller keyboard, which I think most Apples have, but then you have to press that squiggly line next to the 1 to get a lot more options. However, it's highly recommended to use a full keyboard. And the type of mouse that it needs, most mice qualify, or mouses I guess because it's an acronym, qualify, but you need a mouse with a scroll wheel so that you can scroll back to zoom out, scroll in to zoom in, and if you press down on your scroll button, it allows you to choose your angle. It's very intuitive in that sense once you get that. Now I also like to use numpad 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all that. So I just press numpad 1, but if you don't have numpad 1, you can always press front, or you can go back and then you can go front, or whatever the case may be. You can also play with this, but I mean, this is for the barbarians. The most efficient way is probably just getting used to the squiggly line or having a numpad, which is the most efficient way to do things. Right, so now we're in our scene. As you can see, we've got this default cube, and if we click off the default cube, we can see it's not selected. When we select it, it is selected in this bright orange. Now if we hold down shift and select the camera as well, you'll notice that this is dark orange and this is light orange. Now one issue that you might have is if you're zooming in and out, you're not zooming towards the camera. So we're going to quickly change that by going to Edit, Preferences, and I think it's in Viewport, and we want to scroll to mouse wheel. Wherever we're pointing, we want to scroll because that makes more sense. One sec. Here we go. So you want to go to navigation and you want to click on zoom to mouse position. This is probably the most important thing, which we did not cover, and it should automatically save, but if it doesn't, just to be safe, we'll say save preferences. So now when you scroll to your mouse wheel, it's going to zoom to whatever object you're pointing at, which makes life a lot easier. And anyways, so let's select the default cube, and you can press the delete button on your keyboard to delete it. Now we have nothing in our scene except for our light, which is over here, and our camera. Now the first thing we want to add is we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, and in this menu there's something called Add-ons. In Add-ons, this is a bunch of pre-installed plugins that is free, comes with Blender, but they don't install it because they don't like to give you too much bloat. But there is one plugin that we're going to quickly install. It's going to be Tree. And we're going to select this. And once again, just to be safe, even though I don't think we have to do it, we're just saving it to Preferences. There we go, Preferences saved. Now that that's closed, I'm going to press numpad 1. You can press the squiggly line and go to front. I'm going to press Shift A. And now the fun begins. So in Curve, we've got a new option, Sapling Tree Gen. If this is not showing, it means you have to go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and you have to make sure that this is enabled. Right, so we're going to go to Curve, Sapling Tree. Now, if you click on your sapling tree or on any object, the menu down here disappears. And because we're not done with this design, we're going to delete it. It doesn't work. So don't press anything except for this box over here. Once we've selected this box, the first big decision we need to make is, do we want to use a preset? And if so, what preset do we want to use? In this case, we are going to use a preset. I believe I used the Japanese maple earlier, but now I am going to use the weeping willow because I think it's one of the most underrated trees. Now, the first thing you can decide is maybe I want to scale it, and let's say you do something funky. And you don't like what you've done. Well, it's quite easy. You can just click on the various options and just say reset to default, and it can take you back to what the original preset was. You can also just play around with different seeds. This is very similar to geometry nodes having different seeds. I've got a procedural cheese thing where I show you how to make your own thing like this with geometry nodes. But either way, let's quickly just reset the default. And we'll just leave it on default values to make life easier for now. The next thing we want to do is go to branch splitting. Now there are all sorts of cool things we can do here, but and you can really customize your trees to any way that you like, which is pretty cool, but it might be overkill. So the important stuff is the level. Now if you've got a potato computer, never go beyond 3. 2 might even be too much for you. I'm going to use 3, and I can use more because I've got a slightly more powerful computer. And what it does, it just creates extra branches off the bottom branches. So it's almost like a quadratic equation. That's why you want to keep this relatively low. I'm going to leave it on 3 because that's more than enough for this beautiful tree. And the next thing we need to decide is how much branch splitting do we want at the base. And we could reduce it, or we could increase it. I'm going to increase it. However, I don't like this design. It looks funky. So the way we fix that is we go back to geometry nodes and we just try and play around with the seed until we find a design that we like. Okay, this is more on track. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I'm quite happy with that. The next thing we want to do is add some leaves. So once again, we just click over here and we click leaves. Once we've got leaves, we're going to say show leaves. Now, the cool thing about leaves is that we have many options. You can add your own custom leaves. Obviously, for time's sake, we're not going to do that. And this has already imported the right type of leaves, so we're not going to change it. But you could play around and use other preset defaults. I'm quite happy with this. You could also change the leaf value. Yeah, so let's change it to 5. And you'll see almost 5 leaves per branch, basically. It's almost nothing. And if you made a mistake, you just want to reset, you can reset. So the default value is 25, and I kind of prefer that over too many leaves. Let's try 50 just to see. Okay, that's a good looking tree. I quite like that. And the next thing we want to do, we could animate it, but it's going to kill your computer, and that's a much more complex topic because you have to talk about armatures and then animation because you have to do rigging. And even though it's simple in this preset, it's still beyond the scope of today. Right, now that we're happy with the tree, we can now select the tree. Notice that the menu's gone. We can never make changes like that again. Next thing we want to do is press Shift A. Shift A. A is for all. And keep in mind, it's very important to know where my mouse is. My mouse is inside of this viewport. So when I press Shift A, the first thing I'm going to do is hover over Mesh and select Plane. Now we've got a plane at the bottom there. Now, the way I like to do this is I like to press S for scale. You can move your mouse back and forth like that. And you can type in a value. So I'm going to type in 25. I want to scale it by 25 times. And then I'll click. And there we have it. We've got a beautiful plane. I'm quite happy with that. Now we're going to go into modifying your interface. So currently we have another window here. This is currently set to timeline. We don't need a timeline because we're not animating anything, but what we do need is there are 2 ways to go about this. We can use the image editor, or we can use well, to be honest with you, the image editor, the shader editor is the best one, so we'll use the shader editor. Not going to cover things that aren't relevant. Right, now that we've got the shader editor here, one thing we want to do is change our viewport to this option over here, which is your viewport shading. So we can look at it solid without any shading. We can see it with colors. Over here we can see how it looks in the render viewport. And just looking at the render viewport briefly, I'm just going to select this light. And if you can't find it there, you can always look at this over here. This has all the items in your collection, in your scene. So first thing I want to do is right click over here, create a new collection, and I'm going to call this collection tree. And I'm going to take this over here and I'm going to chuck it in that collection with the leaves. There we go. And then I'm going to create a new collection and I'm going to call this other. And I'm going to take this plane and I'm going to chuck it in that new collection. And we can rename this plane to, let's call it ground. There we go. Now that we've done that, let's select the light. And with the light selected, we can tell it's selected because of the orange. There are many ways to move this. So you can click over here on this option over here. What's it called? The move option. And you could move it this way. But the more you use Blender, the less you actually use this. I normally just press G. So I normally go into numpad 1 and move it left to right. And numpad 7, and I do it this way. Now I'm keeping in mind where the camera currently is. So the camera is here, and I might move the camera, but assuming I'm not going to, I'm just going to bring the light over here. And one thing I want to do with the light is change the light setting. So when you select your light, you'll notice that this option's available. Options not available when you have other things selected. So you have unique options based on what you have selected. So I selected the light, and we can make this a point light, a spotlight, or a sun. And if it's a sun, obviously we just need to change the strength to something a little bit more reasonable. And perhaps we want to make the strength even less, 0.5. And then maybe make it late in the afternoon, like a hint of blue. All right, that's looking good. Cool, so that we got our light set up now. The next thing we want to do is decide where we want our camera. Now, once again, you could select your camera. You can press numpad 1 and you could move it side to side. Numpad 7. Obviously, instead of numpad, you can go front and top, basically. Those are the two that I'm doing. And you can move it around this way. And then if you want to see how your camera looks, let's actually go to that view. We can select this icon over here. And then over here, we can move it and we can try and get the right angle. And we've got camera options over here where we can change the focal length and all that if we so choose. However, I find this approach cumbersome. And this is where having a full keyboard makes your life a little bit easier. Obviously, you can also press rotate, and you can press Z to rotate only on the Z axis, or Y only on the Y axis, or X only on the X axis. But that's a pain. So a better way is to just find an angle that you like of your tree. So I happen to like this angle because it shows off the shadow in the background. And I'm going to press Control Alt Numpad 0. And then I'm going to press G, and I'm just going to position it. And then I'm going to press Numpad 7. And I'm going to press G, and I'm just going to pull it back. And I'm paying attention to how it looks here while I move it here, just to make sure I get the right angle. And keep in mind, when it matters where your mouse is when you press these shortcut keys. I'm pressing G now, lifting this up. Yeah, something like that should be fine. And let's just confirm. There we go. Cool. I'm quite happy with that. So now we know how the end result will look. Obviously, if you've got a slow computer, my advice is just leave it on your material viewport or solid viewport. Solid viewport is probably better for the time being. But I'm going to leave it on the render viewport. And the render engine I'm using is Eevee. The two options you have is Eevee or Cycles, ignore Workbench. Eevee is what you'll most likely use, and that's what we'll use in this tutorial because it works better on slower computers. And there are a few settings I would like to add here. I always like to add a little bit of ambient occlusion, just the default presets. You can modify it there if you like. I like to add some bloom. There's nothing in the scene that's going to bloom yet, but as you know, there will be. And you can justify the intensity and stuff, but I'll come back to that once I add something that can bloom. And there's a few things I add here that you don't, anything else I add, don't worry about it. And we don't need motion blur, there's nothing here. One thing you do need to consider is the color management. So over here, you can choose standard, filmic, and you can just go through these settings and decide what you like. I tend to leave it on filmic unless I'm doing AR kind of things, because then you have to preserve as much detail as possible. But filmic is quite nice, and you can use curves over here, but this is beyond this lesson where we really modify the colors. And obviously, once again, we can just select these dots, or reset curve. Perhaps we want to add a bit more red in the scene. You get the idea, and you can create a nice color palette for you. But for the sake of this, I'm just going to leave it turned off, That's something I like to play with. Anyways, right, so the next thing we're going to do is we want to add a color to the branch, to the base, right? So with the base selected, I'm going to press new over here, and then I'm going to go over here, deselect everything, then click over here, and then let's just make this bigger so we can see what's going on. Right, so I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add a mix shader. And what a mix shader allows us to do, it allows us to mix two different shaders. And because I'm not using cycles, I don't have the tune shader, so I will use two principled BSDFs. And a tree doesn't have any subsurface. It doesn't have any specular. It's normally quite rough. There's no sheen tint. There's no clear coat. And you kind of have to do this to both of them because they both are for the tree. And you can really go crazy here. This is a whole thing on its own. Right, so now we just need to select the colors. So normally red is good for a tree. And we're paying attention to how it looks over here. So we're just bringing this down and deciding what's tree-like. So maybe that red will do. And then let's make this orange. And we just bring this down to something like that. Now, let's just zoom out quickly and take a look at our scene by deselecting it. Now, as you can tell, it just looks like a mixture between orange and red. And that's because if we look at the mix factor here, if we make it all the way 0, and just for emphasis, let's just make one green. If it's all the way 0, it's only green. If it's all the way 1, it's only the other color. So it's not exactly a great tool on its own, unless we add, you guessed it, a Voronoi texture. So we're going to press Shift A, and we're going to add a texture. Now, instead of a Voronoi, I think Musgraph looks more tree-like. It really depends on the tree we're talking about here. And we're going to connect this to the factor. And I'm just going to bring this back down to red. Hopefully I'm zoomed in enough. And what we can do is I'm going to use multifractal. You can play around with this. And I'm just going to increase the intensity. We just zoom out. Pardon me. And perhaps let's just make this more bright so you can see what's going on. So you can see that it's creating this interesting pattern. And we're just trying to create a tree-like pattern. Let's try ridged multifractal. No. Hybrid. Okay, I'm going to just leave it at multifractal. And something like that looks fine to me. The only thing that needs to happen is this needs to come down. And there we have it. And the cool thing about using shaders is that it's scalable. It's infinitely scalable because it's math-based, much like Adobe Illustrator. The next thing we want to do is we want to add some color to these leaves. And this is where we're going to press, now we could press new here, but to be different, we're going to go over here to our menu with the leaf selected. We've got material properties, and we're going to add a material here. And then this appears. But to be different, I'm going to select this, delete. I'm going to press Shift A, and we are going to add an emission shader. Boom. And this emission shader, I'm going to put it on 10. And you can tell that's got that bloom effect because in the render settings I added it earlier, and we can justify it later. Currently it's set to white, and perhaps we like that. We can always play around with it whenever we like, but let's play around with it. Let's choose I don't know, some weird magic tree. Right, so now that we've got that done, the next thing we want to do is add an environmental texture. And the best place to find environmental textures that are free is Polyhaven. And you'll notice that your scene is slowly but surely coming together. And it's really about having fun and just getting familiar with the software as we navigate these waters. So I'm just finding a random one on Polyhaven. I'm assuming you all know where to look. Let me just show you. So on Polyhaven, I am going to select this one here. And you can download the level that you think is appropriate. And once you've got it downloaded, I'm just adding it to my desktop so I can easily find it. Okay, great. So now that we've got that, let's add an environmental texture. Now over here, where my mouse is, it says World Properties. Select that. And we could just change the color of the background over here, which is kind of cool in itself. And you can actually animate this but with keyframes, but we're not going to get into that. Instead, we are going to add an environmental texture. And this, like Byron said, this pink basically says that it's missing something. You need to add something here. And in this case, we're going to press open. And you can just find that environmental texture you just downloaded. And what was it called? Now I just have to find it. Let me just make this bigger. Here we go. And there we go. So now we've got the scene, although it still looks a bit funky. So how do we fix that? It's a bit too bright. It will be nice if it's a little bit darker. So we can just change the strength over here. Let's try 0.1. And this is all about what you think is appropriate. I'm quite happy with that. The next thing that we want to do is select this, and now we're getting into the juicy stuff, the fun stuff. We're going to create non-destructive modeling, which is one of the best types of modeling. I'm going to click on this modifier over here with this selected, and we're going to add a modifier. The first modifier we're going to add is a subdivision surface. And I'm going to give you a pro tip. You can keep your viewport very low, because the higher you add this, the more vertices will be added to your scene, which means the more RAM and processing power your PC needs to run it. For me, however, because I'm doing a tutorial, I can crank this up because I have a good computer. But keep your viewport on 1, and you can always render it out at 6 later on. And if you want to see what I mean, hold on one sec. Let me just clean this up because I'm not using both. Oh yeah, so if you want to, let's say you've got 2 windows here, and you don't need 2 windows. All you need to do is hover here until you see this X, and you can do that. Now you've got 1 window, and you can always bring it back. But if you don't like it, there you go. So, right. So, actually, let's just move on. Let's go. Currently, if you press Tab, so currently we're in object mode. Tab, we're in edit mode. And because we're doing non-destructive modeling, we're not seeing all the fine detail one would normally see over here. And that's actually a good thing. It means the computer doesn't have to think as hard as it normally would. Now let's add a displacement. And we're going to add a texture. Now, much like we added a texture to change the material pattern of the tree, we can click over here, texture properties, and we can add one here. Now, it's good practice to name your textures correctly. So we're going to call this ground texture, and we're going to press open. Well, not open, I do apologize. We're going to change from image. We could put in your own image here, but in this case, we're going to use clouds. Now, it looks very polygony, and to fix that, you can just right click and say shade smooth. And we will make it look better in a sec. We can play around with some of these settings, but let's quickly just go over here, and we could just change the strength to a strength that we think is more suitable. And I think if we go back here, we probably want to increase the scale. Where we've got heels, but it's not too heely, if that makes sense. Cool, I'm quite happy with that. And just for extra level of detail, after you've added that, because the order of operation does matter, we can add another subdivision surface modifier, and that's just for rendering it out to make it crisp, like super smooth. And you could really have fun with this. Right, so let's just view how this looks in our render view at the moment. That looks pretty good. However, one problem we have, what is our camera view? Okay, cool. So we can just numpad, well, see, when we're thinking about our camera view, we can just do this. And then over here, I'm going to press numpad 7. You can press the squiggly line and just go top. And with the ground selected, I'm just going to press G. And this is what happens in the 3D industry. The only thing that matters is what is visible. People don't need to see the rest. That's kind of how it works. Right, so I'm quite happy with that. And now we just need to add a texture to the ground. And there are two ways to do it. We could add a shader, but instead of adding a shader, let's do it using image textures. So once again, go to polyhaven.com. Hold on. That's not it. Go to polyhaven.com, and now we can just go to browse textures, and we could even add, hold on, terrain. Let's find terrain, and this one looks good enough, and we're going to press download. Now, an interesting thing about textures, there are normally at least 4 components to textures. We're talking about the actual colors that it has, and then we got the ambient occlusion, the roughness, and one sec, let's just make sure it is here. I'm just opening up this. Let me pause quick. All right, so there are different images doing different things, and I'm going to go over them now quickly. Let me just import it into the scene. One sec. So I'm going to press new over here, and Control C. I'm just copying some things across, and I'll explain it afterwards, because this is the stock standard way to do things. Oh, that's no good. Hold on. Oh, okay, I guess I have to manually add each thing. Okay, not to worry. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is press Shift A, and I'm going to type in, image. And I'm going to press Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V, and then finally Control C, Control V. So you're going to have 4 options here for the 4 different images, which is quite important. And make sure that you've unzipped those images and you know where you've downloaded them. And then we can begin. So I'm going to press open, and I'm just going to find those images. So this one over here is the diffusal. Yeah, diffusal. Right. So now that that is done, I'm going to make sure linear, flat, repeat, single. This is all fine. Cool. Next one we're going to add is the displacement. This gives 3D geometry to something where there is not 3D geometry, which is quite cool. And we can just leave it as is. Technically, this needs to be on, only one should be RGB, and the rest should be on non-color. Okay, let's quickly add some roughness. Find the roughness image. Once again, we need to make sure it's on non-color. And last but not least is the 2-in-1, the NOR. Once again, this needs to be on non-color. Now that we've got our images in our scene, we need to add it to the ground. So the first thing we want to do is add some mapping. So I'm going to press Shift A, keeping my mouse is in this area, Shift A, search, and I'm going to type in map or mapping. There we go, select that, and we've got the mapping node. Alright, so we're going to connect this over here. And this is quite the ugly way to do it. We should actually do it a neater way, but I could not be bothered right now because it doesn't change the result, and this is good enough to get you comfortable with the software. But you can make this very neat. This is neat enough. I guess it's not going to be too complicated. Right, and then the next thing we need to do is add a normal map to the NOR, which is at the bottom here. So we're going to press Shift A, and we're going to type in normal map, bring this over here, connect the color to the color, and connect this to the normal. And that's our first little piece done. Next thing we want to do is add a displacement map to the displacement. So which one is displacement? So I just click on this. That's our NOR. Yeah, that's fine. So what is this? Roughness. Displacement. Okay, we need to add a displacement map here. So let's type in this. Perhaps I should do it this way so it doesn't confuse anyone. Displacement, there we go. And we need to connect our displacement color into our height. And we need to connect our height into our displacement over here. Now we can see that things are starting to overlap, so we can do a little bit of cleanup. So one thing I'll do is just bring this down over here, bring this up over here, bring this over here, and bring this over here. So now we've got this nice and neat. The last thing we have to do is actually add the colors, because currently when we look at this, as cool as that is, it's still the same color. So let's add the colors. And this is just the normal, this is the diffusion, whoops. So I haven't connected two of them basically. Okay. Roughness. So we can connect the roughness to the roughness. Where is, hold on. Apologies about this. Let's bring this up. And we find roughness. There we go. So we want to connect the roughness with the roughness. And we want to connect the diffusal for the colors. And I'm going to use Christian Barkley. And this should be enough to see things in action. So, just so I can focus on this to make sure it worked, I think it's to do with the mapping over here. Ah, yes, I need to add texture coordinates, of course. So I'm going to press Shift A. We're going to type in texture coordinates, and we're going to connect our UV into our vector. There we go. That's looking a little bit better, although the pattern is painful, and we could do things to fix that, but that might be beyond what we're doing today. And let me just double check everything, just make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, it's fine. And what is this? It's on object space. Let's give it more height, 0.69. Yeah, maybe I chose the wrong texture, but it is what it is. Perhaps let me just quickly play around with this. Let's click generate. Okay, let's go back to UV. And I think that's going to have to do it for now. That's looking a lot better. I think I just needed to refresh. Okay, cool. So now we have our scene. Let's just see how it looks within our camera viewport. Now this ambient occlusion is a bit much, so I'm going to select it, and I'm just zooming in and zooming out to find this. That's what I was doing. Let's make this 1. It hasn't got that bloom. Perhaps 5. Actually, let's make this white, so we can just here we go. If we make it 10, how does it look? And let's go to our render settings over here and mess with the bloom. And if we want to mix this up, we can add another Shift A shader, mix shader, Shift A shader, and we are going to add, let's add a translucent thing. Let's turn this into a hologram. That could be fun. All right, so now the next thing we need to add is Shift A, search, and we're going to type in layer weight. With layer weight selected, we can now use the facing of the layer weight into the factor, and we don't see much change yet. But if we make this 0.9, let's try 0.95. There we go, we're getting closer to it. It's a little bit harder to do a hologram on this. Let's try 0.99. This honestly works better with a monkey head. Just to demonstrate, I'll press Shift A, mesh. You normally need a bigger object than a plane to make a hologram, so to really see it work, let's just chuck that over there, and numpad 3, R for rotate, and I'm just going to quickly add a quick subdivision surface modifier, right click shade smooth, and I am going to basically use the same stack we just did over here on the leaves, which is this. Control C to copy, select this, delete it, Control V to paste, and now I can see if it's working or not. Let's try 0.996. It's not quite there. So the thing we need to do is go to our material properties, and we need to change opaque to alpha blend. Here we go, boom. Okay, now we are talking. And we should do the same for the tree. Let's actually increase this to 0.95. Let's just see the level that we like. But we can definitely see that this feels more hologrammy. And 0.99. It's almost ghost-like now, but anyways, we'll leave that for now. If you want a tutorial on to do that correctly, I can make it, but let's just change this to alpha blend. Now we can also have a tune effect, so let's just deselect that and just see how it looks. That's great. It actually looks pretty good when you move from side to side. So when we animate the camera, that's going to look beautiful. All right. So the next thing we want to do, just so that you have exposure to the technology, we want to add little shrubs, even if it's the same shrub, or rocks to the scene, so the scene doesn't look too barren. But before we do that, I just want to press S to scale this, S4. And I just need to make sure that the bottom of this tree is numpad 1. And I'm just going to go to the wireframe, not the wireframe mode. Let's do this. Okay, GZ. Okay, so this is just not a, hold on, numpad 1, numpad 3, there we go, GZ. Okay, cool, so that does look like it's in place. One thing I do want to do is just mess with the strength of the texture modifier, which is over here. And then I'm going to just select the tree, and with the whole tree selected, I'm going to press GZ. Hold on, let's just go over here, tree. In this case I need to select leaves also, else it won't work. Shift, holding shift, you can select multiple options. GZ. Oh, that didn't work. Hold on. There we go. Hold on, this is just H to hide that. Just selecting everything here. Alt H to bring it back. Numpad 1. Numpad 3. Let's just view it from here actually. Let's turn this off and just press GZ just to lift it up or down. Hold on. Let's just bring the ground down. GZ. Here we go. GZ. There we go. Something like that should be fine. We can go back to render view. Yep, that's looking good. And even though we're not making much use of the outside area, it's more to help with other stuff, other unrelated stuff. It does add to the scene, although it's not the focus at all. Look at that beautiful tree. Right, the next thing we want to do is let's just quickly just add your first camera rig. So this is going to be fun. So we're going to press Shift A, and we are going to add a empty, and we're going to use a circle empty. And with the circle empty, I'm going to press S20, and I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis. When I say x-axis, I'm pressing X to lock it on the x-axis. You can press Y to lock it on the y-axis, or Z to lock it on the z-axis. I'm pressing X, and you can tell I did because of that red line that's sticking out now. Then I'm going to go 90, and I'll click. So now it's like that, which is great. Next thing I want to do is, with this selected, I'm going to now where's the camera? There it is. Okay, so the camera is dark orange. The circle is light orange. I'm going to press Control P, P for Peter. In this case, Control P, P for parent. And I say object. And I'm going to take this empty over here. I'm going to chuck it in this collection. I'm going to call this the camera rig. So this is what we're going to animate. Very basically, we're not going to add jitters and stutters and stuff, just a basic animation going around the tree so we can see your beautiful design from all angles. And I think I'll stop here. I don't want to go too far by adding geometry nodes and stuff. This is just to get you comfortable with the software, and this is quite a lot as it is. So let's just animate this now. Right, so we've got the camera viewport, which is this. So now I just want to change the camera viewport. So you can position your camera the way you like. Find a spot that you think is cool. And I'm just going to select just the camera. I'm going to find a spot that I think like this. Control Alt Numpad 0 in my case. And let's see how it looks in the camera view. It's okay. I'm fine with that. And the next thing we're going to do is select this room over here. And now we're going to animate the camera. So this will be your technical first animation. Let's see. We're going to go to timeline. Bring this down. And oh no. Ooh, hold on. There we go. Gonna go over here. Let's zoom in. And let's also make this render view. Okay, cool, we've got that. We probably should have made this multiple colors. We could, but I'm not gonna, I'm going too far as it is. Right, so now that we've got this set up, we can now do some cool stuff. We can, I believe keyframes is, one thing I forgot to mention is when I parented the camera to the camera rig, for example, if I were to parent these leaves to the tree, for example, actually no, better example, if I were to parent these leaves to the ground, the leaves are dark orange, the ground is light orange, therefore if I control P this, the leaves would be the child to the ground. So that's just, the color is important to pay attention to. Anyways, let's go back to this. So now that we've got this rig set up, and this is the parent to the camera, because that's what we did, we're going to click on this icon over here, which is auto keying. And now that we've done that, all we need to do, now keep in mind, it's about 30 frames per second. So this is 1 second, this is 2 seconds, this is 3 seconds. So you don't want to spin too much. So let's make this a 120 second animation. So we're going to say from start to end, it's going to be 120, which is 4 seconds basically. Oh, 210, autistic, 120. Now that we've done that, the next thing we want to do is decide how much we want to rotate this by. So I'm going to press R to rotate this, Z to lock it to the Z axis, and I'm going to type in 90 degrees should be enough. And once I've done that, it auto keys over here. So now when I go to the beginning, I press play. Of course, it didn't key the beginning. So when I go back to the beginning, there we go. And I press rotate Z 90, click. Now it's going to rotate like that with holographic leaves. Pretty dope. And last thing we can decide upon is, let's just clean this viewport up, is how much bloom do we want. So we could mess with this quite a bit. If you get stuck, you can always just reset the value. Intensity, maybe something like that would be nice. And you can change the bloom color to a different color if you wanted to. So you can see it pop. I'll just leave it on like that. And once you're happy with everything, I'm going to leave it on filmic. I'm not going to mess with the colors. We can now press render. Oh, before we do, one final thing. We have to go to our output properties. You choose a folder where you want to save your file to. So in my case, I'm going to save this to desktop. And the correct way to do it is to do it with images first. And then after you do it with images, turn it into a video. And that's the right way to do things. But to cut this video short, I am going to just make it a straight video, which is not the way to do things. I can't stress that enough. I'm just doing it because this video is long enough and the quality needs to be 100%. And the resolution for this, you can decide. You can use a preset. I'm going to make it 4K because Why not? Here we go. And we're going to catch the result. And I'm not going to do post-processing stuff in this video. Hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully you guys are keen to keep following the series to level up. Blender is an amazing program.